what Nintendo did do last week is they announced that they will be um, releasing two old games on the Switch, and I think the Switch too. It's Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, which came out again 20 years ago. Really dating myself here. Uh, and I think the big problem with it, which is no problem, I have no problem with them re-releasing games. So the thing of it is they are charging $20 for it. And a lot of people were really upset about that. But let me explain something. Nintendo is a company that does not enjoy its own customers. It's a very weird thing to say. They like their money, they don't like anything else. They are very anti people using things like emulation, even though they themselves use it. They don't like people pirating their games, which obviously there's a legitimate a beef there. But, one thing that a person who does emulate will say is that Nintendo does not make their library available for the general public anymore. There are probably thousands of games in the entire history of gaming that you just can't that aren't available to be played anymore. And that's not just the Nintendo. I mean, you have all the old arcade games. You really have to go far and wide to try to find an old arcade cabinet these days just to play a game. It's not widely accepted. Um, so in this particular case, it's good that Nintendo is re-releasing games, albeit, whatever it is. Now they're charging $20 for two games, which, a lot of people will say it was like a high price. But if you were to look on eBay, uh, just for like a reproduction cart, which is basically someone just remade the cart and put the game on it and just selling it to people, that's exactly what you're going to pay. you know which to me, if your goal is to preserve games, I mean, any avenue that you can get is probably the best. It is good to see that Nintendo is releasing games like that, and if they're going to make a little bit of money on it, okay, that's fine. That's the way it should be. I have no problem with them selling games, making money despite the fact that they're 20 years old, 30 years old, whatever it is. If they're available, let the people have it. I think it would be it's not a good move to sort of hoard these old games just for funsies. You know, I think it's a very smart move on their part to be re-releasing some of these games. They've done it before. They redid some years ago. They had the NES Mini and they have the Super Nintendo Classic. And they released 30 games. That's cool. I love seeing that the people can experience those games, and I think some of those all the games shouldn't be lost media because you think about it. My whole thing when it comes to video games is that, even the simplest of video games, let's take Pong, right? The very first video game, Pong, you know, a lot of people worked on that game, and obviously these games aren't, the most well or the most fantastical, complex games in the world, but, a lot of people worked on them. A lot of people put their heart and souls on them. You look at some of the early Nintendo games, some people, they wrote those games. They wrote a whole story. You look at the early Zelda game, the very first one, there's a whole lore behind all these games. A lot of stuff was written. There's a lot of heart and soul in these old games, despite how simple they are, how they were back then. And I think that alone, I think puts them in a realm where they should be preserved. Like anything else, if like it's a really good old movie or an old TV show that, it should be preserved for newer, younger generations to watch and to learn from. Because it's always good to go back and listen to old art, if you will. So, for anyone who's really upset about the $20 price tag on the new game, it is what it is. And in terms of things they could be doing, they could be in a lot worse because, any of the new games that you get from Nintendo is very expensive these days. Um, $80 for like a new game for a Nintendo, which is highway robbery in my opinion, especially for the quality of the games you're getting. It's just a re-release. You're getting you have to spend $80 for it. I personally don't spend all that much money, but such is life. Anyways, that's my whole spiel for right now.